Kia ora, ko Craig McCulloch hau, anei te pūrongo tōranga pū mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics. If 2020 was tough, 2021's been tougher. The damage dealt by Delta, the end of elimination, and the relentless grind of learning to live with the virus. I sat down with the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, on the 9th floor of the Beehive to look back on the year and what lies ahead.
There's a fatigue from COVID. And I think in 2020, there was a sense of everyone rallying globally, a lot of cooperation towards vaccines and a lot of hope pinned around those. And then they arrived, and Delta arrived. And I think everyone's come to realise that it is going to take ongoing work to continue to keep populations safe, even in a vaccinated environment. And I think that's been really hard for everyone to come to terms with. So because of the ongoing health impacts, but also the psychological impact of a pandemic that's been going for more than 20 months, 2021 has been very hard.
Do you recall the moment that you realised New Zealand wasn't going to be able to eliminate COVID-19 again?
There wasn't just, this singular thing that occurred. There were cumulative signs. I certainly remember very early on walking through a timeline with our public health team around right at the beginning of the outbreak when someone had been exposed to Delta and then had passed it on to someone else. And I remember asking them again to run through that timeline and just realising then that not only was it more infectious, it was moving faster. And by moving faster, what would that mean for our ability to eliminate? So I remember really early on thinking this is going to be very, very hard. And then as we went and we saw Delta move into different parts of our community, over time it was becoming clear that some of those things that had previously worked for us weren't working in the same way. They weren't showing the same results as quickly, and it was tough. Yeah, so
we got close. We got down to single digits.
We got close. We did get close.
When we went to level 3, did you know then that it wasn't going to be possible?
So we had not given up on the idea of elimination. But our view was at that point, and the advice was, there was nothing additional that level 4 was giving us that made it any more likely than what we might be able to do from level 3. And in fact, the advice had been to move earlier into level 3 than we did. But we wanted to give ourselves the best possible shot. So we stayed a little longer before we moved. But we knew at that point that it wasn't going to be easy, and there was a chance that we might not.
In January, you described 2021 as the year of the vaccine.
Yeah, and it has been.
With hindsight, what would you have done differently regarding our rollout?
Yeah, well, the thing that that guided so much of what we had to do was we were really constrained by supply. There are things that we could have done had everything arrived at once. There are things that we could have done differently. When I reflect back, there are some learnings. Some of the most successful parts of the campaign have been where providers have had the freedom to just go out and do things in a way that have worked for them, and I think that they had barriers that. I'll think about how could we have taken those down more quickly, sooner for them. So that's something that I would do differently. And we can take that forward now for the 5 to 11 rollout. But, when we think about where we finished, it was the year of the vaccine, and to finish with, rates in the mid-90% mark for first dose, 85% for Māori, over 90% for Pacific. I'm really proud of what New Zealand's done, because those are rates that, at the beginning, I'm not sure I would have predicted we could get there.
You mentioned supply at the beginning of the year. Was there anything that we could have done to get that supply here earlier? Could we have signed contracts earlier? Could we have begun negotiations earlier?
We did everything that we could have done to get vaccines as soon as we could.
Looking at the timeline, though, in terms of the contract signing, we didn't sign till December. The US and UK did in July. Canada was October.
No, so just to be clear, some of the, of course, agreements we signed were before even clinical trials had finished. I do believe we did all that we could do to get access as early as we could, but it doesn't mean we necessarily ended up being the first. However, the countries that were, we have now overtaken. Those countries that started rollouts before us, we have finished in a better position than they are.
We've learned recently that the Health Ministry recommended that the age threshold for Māori be 15 years lower. Sean Hendy recommended something similar. We know that Canada and Australia did that for their Indigenous people. New Zealand didn't. Do you regret that?
We did for counties, you remember, and we did something a bit more nuanced, of course. So we, of course, at the beginning didn't have enough supply for everyone. The evidence told us that the people most likely to be affected by COVID-19 and may most likely lose their lives would be older New Zealanders and also those who had underlying conditions. And so with the supply that we had, our view was we had to reach those individuals. And you see we have really high rates there for those groups. But at the same time, we also knew that because we were targeting those who had underlying illnesses, we know we have more comorbidities in our Pacific and our Māori population. So we knew that would allow us to go in and target those communities too. The second thing we did was not just about age, because as you say, some recommended just a generic age range. We instead said, well, actually, if you've got a vulnerable person living with a wider group, we should vaccinate the whole whānau. When we access that person, we do everyone. So we allocated vaccine to do that at the beginning, and we gave the flexibility providers to do that as well. You know, when I think about that, could we have made that clearer that we were taking that approach? Could we have advertised that more? Yeah, perhaps we could have, because it does seem to me that not everyone was aware that we were taking that approach at the start.
And Māori now make up almost half of all cases in our outbreak.
Also 85% of eligible first doses and also 90% in Auckland as well. We always knew that with the COVID-19 it would reach our most vulnerable. That's what's happened in every country. It's why we took the elimination approach. And of course, it's why we put extra funding and support to make sure our vaccination campaigns were very focused on our whole order providers. And in my view, it's why we've seen the acceleration.
You stand by that prioritisation, then you do not think it was the right thing to do?
Look, you know, of course, many of the discussions that we've had, I think often since that time, perhaps the fact that we had that limited supply at that time doesn't always feature in those discussions. But look, there are things that we could have done differently, better, always. Gosh, if you're not willing to learn, then you're not willing to improve. So we've got a chance now to look back and, you know, all of the team is at what we did, what we could have done better, and how we can improve that for our 5 to 11s.
5 to 11-year-olds, they are currently being vaccinated in the US and Canada right now, and the EU is just about to begin. What's taken so long here?
Of course, the decision around rollout to 5 to 11s isn't made by government. Rightly, we've always said we'll use our full processes. So MedSafe and our expert advisory group. And so they they went through the full process for our general rollout. They're doing the same for 5 to 11s. And I do not want to rush that group. We want them to be considered.
Is there a case to be made to actually streamline that? Is it credible to think that MedSafe will uncover something that international authorities haven't?
Well, I think we want people to have confidence that we don't just co-opt what other countries do, because, of course, in some cases for the vaccine rollouts, for instance, many countries granted emergency approvals, or sometimes vaccines were still in a trial, and that was because they had a larger number of cases, they had a larger number of deaths. And so that was the context in which they were considering their vaccine approvals. New Zealand's often been in a different set of circumstances. And in my view, one of the reasons we have good uptake of the vaccine is because our approval process had been carried out in full. I think people have confidence in those processes, and we are never going to politically interfere in them. They need to be clinical decisions.
Vaccine certificates and vaccine mandates this time next year, do you anticipate they will still be in place?
Gosh, you know, one of the things that we've always done is try to ensure that we use all of the research and evidence and also the overseas experience to determine what is going to make the biggest difference for pandemic management for us. One of the advantages of New Zealand being a season behind the rest of the world is countries like Denmark in August said, okay, our vaccine rates are high enough now, we're not going to use vaccine passes anymore. So they did that in August. One of the reasons we turned our minds to using passes is because we saw that they had been quite successful in maintaining as lower level restrictions as possible overall. So we watched with interest those countries who then removed them. Most have now put them back. And so what I anticipate we'll do is we'll continue to look over and see what difference these tools make. How can we continue to give as people as much certainty as possible, have the lowest level of restrictions, but not yo-yo. And so that's why we designed a framework that allowed us to move up and down a system rather than pulling everything off and then putting everything back again.
Is it fair to say that given boosters look like they're going to be required, that mandates and vac certificates could be around for quite a while?
Look, so much depends on the evolution of this pandemic. I mean, gosh, we'll soon see soon enough, I believe, what Omicron will mean for the world. Certainly early suggestions suggest it's more transmissible. Some are suggesting it may overtake Delta in the UK, but what will be key to the way we operate in the future is the severity of the illness. You know, gosh, I think we're all waiting or hoping for a scenario where even if it is more dominant than Delta, if it's more dominant but less severe, does that position us to have more options in the way that we handle this illness going forward? So it's a big wait and see, but what I can say to New Zealanders is that we will always do our best to create frameworks that create certainty as much as we can. So even if we're in a good spot now, people will know that, look, if things do get a bit harder, this is where we will go next. And that's been always part of our planning.
On Omicron, given the development and the spread of it overseas, how committed are you to New Zealand's reopening next year?
That has been one of the really hard things about 2021, people being separated. And we place so much of our identity around our ability to connect with the world and welcome people here. We have not changed any of our reconnecting plans. My view is that it will only be a few weeks before we know more about Omicron, and that will tell us whether or not we need to do anything differently. But a big focus for us next year will be that reconnection.
You were considering a trip to Europe this year that was deferred to next year.
Yep.
Where else is on your radar?
So, a part of our agenda for next year will be progressing free trade agreements. We've got the UK final stages and, of course, the EU FTA. It would be fantastic to complete two such substantive and significant FTAs in this term of government. I would be very proud if we're able to achieve that. So EU's high on the agenda, North America as well, and of course the ongoing connection and relationships that we have within our own region of the Indo-Pacific.
What about China?
Yeah, so very much there I think there'll be just the practical questions around travel there. But again, as I say, keen to engage. It was not so long ago where I had quite a substantial call with President Xi and the lead up to APEC. And I imagine that when we're able to, we'll look to connect in person.
And as we close, if I can just change tack for a moment, Christopher Luxon was recently quizzed. And given he wants your job, I thought it was only fair that we'll ask you the same questions. I think you have something of an advantage. But what is the unemployment rate?
3.4%. Very proudly.
How much is 2 litres of milk?
Oh, gosh, it depends. It depends what brand you're getting, but about $4.50.
What is the minimum wage?
$20.
And what is the living wage?
$22.75.
And how much has your house gone up in value in the past year?
I have just my family home, and so, of course, whether we're in that or we're back in the market, you're in the same market. I have observed in my own street that there has been a significant increase in house values, absolutely, and that's what we're working so hard to address.
About $600,000.
Not something I sit and analyse, of course.
Are you
because
comfortable with that?
No, I'm not.
You said in 2017, I think, I will not let this housing crisis continue.
And we have every single thing you've seen us do.
House prices have gone up 50%.
RMA reform. We've even, of course, work to ensure that we have longevity around some of those changes and move them through Parliament very quickly. The work we've done to close tax loopholes, to tilt the market away from investors and towards first home buyers, billions into housing acceleration. All of that has been about changing up fundamentally the housing market as it stands. And that's what's required.
You've been asked many times this question, but I'll ask you one more time. In 2022, would you like to see house prices come back?
Yes.
You want them to fall?
But everything, we cannot see the growth continue that we have right now. So would I like to see a housing market that does not have such runaway increases in house price growth? Yes. Everything that we've been doing has been about that. What you're asking is, do I want to see the housing market collapse?
No, I'm not asking. But would you like them to come down from where they are now?
We need it to stop heading in the direction it is. You know, and even if you saw them come away, in many cases it would be bringing back to levels that we were at only a year or two ago. We always keep in mind, though, the reason that we cannot afford to have a housing market collapse is because, of course, this is the most significant asset that most New Zealanders have. But I think everyone would agree we cannot continue to see what we're seeing at the moment.
One thing that you have talked about is a moderate sustained increase in the past. But you're saying actually you would like to see in 2022 it come away from the heights that we're seeing at the moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're confident that will happen?
Everything we're doing is towards making sure that we have that cooling in the market.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.